Although my old partner had already reached the age of 80, after my death, he went and married his first love. I had accompanied him through the struggles of starting a business, living frugally for a lifetime, only to succumb to stomach cancer in the end. Yet, there he was, leaning on a cane, having employees carry festive banners for his wedding with his first love. Tears filled his eyes as he recounted the 60 years they were forced apart. Even my son gazed at her with admiration, saying he had always considered her as his true mother. He even vowed to care for her in old age and give her a proper farewell. The grand spectacle infuriated me so much my very soul exploded in rage. Today is an unforgettable day. At the wedding, Lin Shengxiang, his hair completely white, leaned on his cane, his aged face streaked with tears. Chuhi and I were each other's first love, he announced. We were forced apart for 60 years, but today, we can finally fulfill the dream of rekindling our past love, writing a duet of longing once again. Lin Shengxiang, a frail old man, even imitated the gestures of the young, kneeling on one knee with his son's support, before his first love, who was now also an elderly woman. Juhi, marry me. The company employees below waved festive flags, cheering and shouting in celebration. Some even scattered flower petals nearby, chanting joyous slogans in unison, wishing this pair of twilight lovers a blissful union at last. Hovering in the air, I watched by Chuhi, who had deliberately put on lipstick, smiling brightly as she reached out her hand to Lin Shengxiang. He slipped a solid gold ring onto her finger. The scene was overwhelmingly romantic, a kind of romance I had never experienced in my 60 years of marriage to Lin Shengxiang. From youth to gray hairs, surrounded by children and grandchildren, yet never had I known such splendor and love. I thought our marriage had been relatively fulfilling, but less than 10 days after my death, he brought his first love back home as his bride. He claimed that at his age, he needed to boldly reclaim his true love, so he wouldn't die with any regrets. He even intended to share half of the savings I had scrimped and saved for years, along with the assets we had built together, with his first love's family. And my son, Lin Ye, not only didn't object, but held by Chuhi's wrinkled hand, and affectionately called her mom during the wedding. He even publicly promised to treat Bai Chuhi as his real mother, and care for her in her old age and give her a proper farewell. Before even the 7th day of my passing, no one came to my grave to burn incense for me. Father and son had already turned around to hold a wedding celebration, their faces filled with joy as if my death was a long-awaited relief. They had truly endured with such patience and grace. I had worked tirelessly for our family for 60 years, believing I had a kind husband, a filial son. But in the end, I had spent a lifetime eating half-cooked rice. I let out a cold laugh. And as Lin Shengxiang and Bai Chuhi entered their bridal chamber, everything suddenly went dark. When I opened my eyes again, I had been reborn into my younger years. As soon as I regained my senses, I carried the 3 dishes and a soup I had just prepared to the dining table, only to hear Lin Shengxiang let out a sigh. He turned to our son, Lin Ye, and said, "Your mom always cooks the same dishes every day. I'm getting a bit tired of them. Son, how about we try out that newly opened Western restaurant? Your dad's treating." I glanced at the calendar. Today was the exact day when my old partner's first love finalized her divorce. My son was still in high school this year, and his emotions were written all over his face. At first, he was all smiles, eagerly agreeing to go out for dinner with his dad. But then he noticed my sour expression, and his excitement dimmed as he pouted. Sigh, asterisk. A bunch of kids in my class have already been there, but mom is so stingy. She definitely won't agree. How disappointing. Even though I had seen him show admiration for others before, those words still pierced my heart. All my frugality, who was it really for? During my son's high school years, Lin Shengxiang decided to quit his stable job and venture into starting a business. But the company didn't do well, and he ended up deeply in debt. The garment factory I worked at also shut down. My former boss invited me to head south with him to start a business. But for the sake of my son's education, I refused, choosing instead to stay home to care for him. The little money Lin Shengxiang occasionally brought home was far from enough to cover expenses. I cut back on everything, wearing old, patched clothes from 10 years ago, and scavenging recyclables to make ends meet. I squeezed out whatever I could to ensure the father and son had nutritious meals, saving every piece of meat for them while I went without. In the end, my stomach cancer was the price I paid. Now, reborn, I decided I wouldn't worry about this family anymore. So I calmly told my son, "Who said I wouldn't agree? Your dad said he's treating us to Western food, didn't he? I'll go too. As for these dishes," I said, "just leave them on the table for now." Lin Shengxiang's face immediately stiffened. In his plan, I was supposed to argue with him furiously, after which he would pretend to be angry and take our son to celebrate with his newly divorced first love. But he hadn't expected me to say I would join them too. This is such a waste," he stammered. Lin Shengxiang rubbed his nose awkwardly. "Xiaolon, you've already worked so hard cooking all this food. Why not just stay home and eat it?" My son chimed in beside him. "You're just a night school graduate from the factory. You wouldn't even know how to eat Western food. How could I not understand?" It turned out they had been looking down on me behind my back for a long time, mocking my lack of education, belittling my frugality. None of them respected the work I had done to keep the household running. They even thought I wasn't worthy of enjoying expensive things. Why would they think that? It was because they had someone to compare me to. As expected, in the midst of this heavy silence at home, Lin Shengxiang's newly purchased cell phone suddenly rang. When he saw the name on the screen, he almost jumped out of his seat. He mumbled and stuttered, "Xiaolon, I need to step out to take a call." "Why not take it here?" I said calmly. "What could possibly be so private? There's no one else around." Father and son exchanged nervous glances. Only then did Lin Shengxiang reluctantly press the answer button. From the other end came a soft, delicate voice. It was by Chu He. "Brother Lin," she said sweetly, "Lilin and I are already waiting for you at the Western restaurant. Why haven't you arrived yet?" Lin Shengxiang glanced nervously at me. For a long moment, he didn't dare let out even a breath. I snatched the phone from his hand. "Don't worry," I said coolly. "Our whole family will be there shortly." Lin Shengxiang sat silently at the wheel, driving, while the atmosphere in the car remained heavy with silence. Not a single word was spoken. Back in those days, I had met Lin Shengxiang through a match arranged by relatives. We were both from farming families, working the land with our bare hands. The difference was, his family had supported him to study and attend university. After graduating, he returned to the village with a respectable job, securing an iron rice bowl. Meanwhile, I gave up my chance to study so my younger brother could go to school, and went to work in a factory in the city with my aunt. Both of us earned fixed, meager salaries. But while I managed the household frugally after marriage, saving every bit I could, most of those savings were handed to him as startup capital for his business. He claimed he needed to present himself well for business deals, buying a cell phone, then a car. I never doubted him for a second. Now, looking back, it's clear he wanted to show off for his first love. Bai Chuhe, the only daughter of a scholarly family, had parents who disapproved of Lin Shengxiang's poverty, forcing them to part ways. Now that Bai Chuhe's life had turned sour, ending in divorce, Lin Shengxiang thought he was finally good enough for her. "Xiaolon, don't be angry," he muttered, stealing a glance at me during a red light. "I didn't tell you I was going out with a classmate because I didn't want you to misunderstand. You see, I even planned to bring our son along." From the passenger seat, my son chimed in. "Mom, it's just a classmate meetup. You're overthinking this." "Aunt Bai is so nice," my son said. "Last time, she even brought me imported chocolates. Her daughter just transferred to our school too, and she's in my class." What a coincidence! Bai Chui and Lin Shengxiang were old classmates from University B. Now her daughter was in the same high school class as my son. In my previous life, I naively believed this. I treated Bai Chui as nothing more than one of Shengxiang's classmates. Little did I know they got married immediately after my death. It turned out they had already rekindled their affair long before. My son even seemed to have a liking for Bai Chui's daughter. No wonder in my past life, I sensed he had signs of early romance. When I put an end to it, he resented me for a lifetime. As soon as we entered the restaurant, the waiter led us to a window-side table. This was the first Western restaurant in the province, and in the 1990s, it was considered extravagant. Very few could afford to dine there. There was even a buffet table with neatly arranged salads and fruits for customers to pick freely. But for someone like me who had been reborn, this wasn't surprising anymore. I glanced around the hall casually. Lin Shengxiang quickly pinched my arm and whispered in my ear, "Stop looking around like that. It's embarrassing. When eating Western food, hold the fork in your left hand and the knife in your right. Don't mess it up." Before I could respond, he hurriedly walked over to greet Bai Chui. The moment he approached, Bai Chui gave him a big, enthusiastic hug. Instinctively, Shengxiang glanced nervously back at me. Then he glanced at Bai Chui again, his hands suddenly unsure of where to go. It was only then that Bai Chui seemed to notice me. She released Lin Shengxiang and playfully stuck out her tongue. "Oh, is this sister-in-law?" she said. "So sorry. I just came back from the US. The customs there are a bit different from here. I heard sister-in-law didn't attend university, so you might not know." Her words were laced with subtle mockery, but my son eagerly chimed in. "Mom, don't be so old-fashioned. And Bai is a graduate of University B's English department. She even married a foreigner." This is all perfectly normal. My face darkened. My son's heart was already leaning towards Bai Chui. He even publicly scolded me in front of everyone, trying to play the peacemaker. Lin Shengxiang laughed awkwardly and urged everyone to sit and eat. But another issue quickly arose. When Shengxiang made the reservation, he had never considered that I might come along. The rectangular table was perfectly arranged so that he and our son sat directly across from Bai Chui and her daughter. Meanwhile, I, like an outsider, had to ask the restaurant staff to add an extra chair, positioned right by the serving aisle. The sizzling hot steak plates came dangerously close to burning me a few times, but Shengxiang didn't notice a thing. Instead, he gallantly picked up a knife and fork and started cutting steak for Bai Chui. My son, Lin Ya, mimicked his father's actions, earnestly cutting meat for Bai Chui's daughter, Lin. I sat motionless in my chair, watching the scene unfold in silence. I placed the knife and fork on the table with a loud asterisk clank. Asterisk. Lin Shengxiang furrowed his brows, and finally seemed to remember my existence. His tone carried a hint of disdain. "Didn't I tell you? Left hand holds the fork, right hand holds the knife. Can't you remember even this?" Bai Chui covered her mouth dramatically and said, "Oh my goodness, sister-in-law hasn't eaten Western food before?" She turned to Shengxiang and added, "Brother Lin, why don't you help her cut the meat?" But Shengxiang dismissed her suggestion. "She's not missing any hands, is she?" I chuckled. Suddenly, I recalled my first time eating steak in my previous life. It was my daughter-in-law who had insisted on taking me out, while my husband and son ate as they pleased. I had sat there awkwardly, clueless about what to do. I was so nervous I didn't know where to start, but my daughter-in-law patiently guided me. "Mom," she had said, "just eat however you feel comfortable. Never treat yourself poorly." If I were the old Chen Shaolon from my past life, faced with the well-dressed, highly educated Bai Chui, I might have felt so inferior that I couldn't lift my head. But now, having lived into my 70s and endured stomach cancer, I hadn't tasted meat in years. The new me was thick-skinned, unrestrained, and determined to do whatever I pleased. So I called over a nearby waiter and asked him to cut the steak for me. Then I requested a pair of chopsticks. Under Bai Chuhi's astonished gaze, I used the chopsticks to pick up a piece of meat and popped it directly into my mouth. Chewing contentedly, I remarked, "What's the big deal with Western dining etiquette? When in China, one should follow Chinese customs and use chopsticks." Lin Shengxiang's face turned bright red with anger, but he was too concerned about saving face to say anything. He didn't say anything in front of Bai Chuhi as we were about to leave. He claimed it was too dark outside, and the road wasn't safe. He offered to walk the mother and daughter upstairs. I waited in the car for a long time, but he never came back. When I went to the building entrance, I saw them reluctantly saying their goodbyes. Bai Chuhi looked hesitant, took a deep breath, and said softly, "Brother Lin, all these years since we parted, you must have had a hard time too. I've seen your wife." Before she could finish, Lin Shengxiang impatiently interrupted, "Don't bring her up. She's uneducated, barely knows how to read. But let's talk about you. Now that your divorce is finalized, what are your plans?" Bai Chuhi blushed and said shyly, "When I named my daughter Linlin, it was because I never forgot about you." The two gazed at each other affectionately, their longing glances nearly tangible. Lin Shengxiang patted his chest and assured Bai Chuhi, "Whatever you need, I'll help cover the expenses." A couple of days later, I went to retrieve my savings book from the bottom of the wardrobe to pay for a health checkup, only to find it missing. "Lin Shengxiang, have you seen my savings book?" My first instinct was to confront him. In my previous life, my savings book had disappeared the same way. Back then, Shengxiang claimed it must have been stolen by a thief, and even blamed me for not hiding it well. I had believed him and felt guilty, losing my appetite for days. But aside from Shengxiang, who else could possibly know where I kept my savings book? He had just said he'd help Bai Chuhi with her financial difficulties, and now, suddenly, the money from home was gone. What a coincidence! Coming to my senses, I realized Lin Shengxiang was using the same excuses as before. He scolded me harshly, slammed the door theatrically, and then hurriedly drove off. I hailed a taxi to follow him. I saw him enter the hospital's inpatient department, placing an arm around Bai Chuhi's shoulders and softly comforting her. "It's nothing serious. Linlin just has a minor illness. Kids get pneumonia from fevers all the time. She recovers soon." Today, Bai Chuhi wore a plain long dress and had lightly applied natural makeup. She wiped her tears delicately, leaning against Shengxiang's shoulder. "Brother Lin, thank goodness you're here. Ever since I divorced Linlin's dad and returned to China, I've been at such a loss for what to do. Asterisk sob 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 asterisk. Men can't resist their first love stares, especially when she represents the one who got away during his weakest moments. In her, he saw the best opportunity he'd ever missed." Looking pained, Lin Shengxiang clasped her hand tightly, ready to say something tender, when a loud voice interrupted them. It was my son, emerging from the hospital room. Seeing me, he yelled, "Mom, what are you doing at the hospital?" His tone was full of disdain, as if my appearance had ruined the sentimental scene between Shengxiang and Bai Chuhi. His voice grew sharp. "Why aren't you at home? What are you even doing here at the hospital? And you," I shot back, my voice calm but firm. "Shouldn't you be at school?" I asked. A wave of bitterness swept over me. Earlier today, my son had called from the school's phone booth to tell me that his teacher was holding extra tutoring sessions for top students, and that he'd be home late. But now, here he was, studying at the side of Bai Chuhi's daughter's sickbed, even skipping his main classes during the day. My son was momentarily at a loss for words. Hearing the commotion, Lin Shengxiang quickly let go of Bai Chuhi's hand, jumping up in a fluster. Meanwhile, Bai Chuhi remained composed, calmly dabbing her tears with a tissue. Her reddened eyes turned toward me as she said softly, "Sister-in-law, how did you manage to find us here? Linlin had a fever and pneumonia. We were in a rush." So I called brother Lin for help. I'm truly grateful to your whole family. She paused, choking up briefly. If it weren't for the circumstances, I wouldn't have wanted to trouble anyone. Lin Shengxiang immediately began comforting Bai Chuhi, but suddenly seemed to realize something, turning toward me with a frown and snapping, "Shen Xiaolon, did you follow me here? I've already told you. Chuhi and I are just old classmates. She's divorced now, and her parents won't let her return home. She's out here on her own, raising her child." Linlin's pneumonia and fever caught her off guard. She couldn't handle it alone. The more he spoke, the more indignant he became. By the end, he proclaimed righteously, "Everything between us is perfectly innocent." I let out a cold laugh. Who would have thought that Shengxiang could shamelessly use words like asterisk perfectly innocent asterisk? I came to the hospital for a checkup, I said icily. And what do you know, both you and our son are here too. So who stole my 10,000 yuan savings book? I demanded coldly. If it's not returned, I'm calling the police. 10,000 yuan. The mixed-race girl lying on the hospital bed, attached to an for drip, grudgingly asked her mother Bai Chuhi, "Mom, does it really cost that much to treat my pneumonia?" Embarrassed, Bai Chuhi hurriedly tried to cover her daughter's mouth. But it was too late. In her haste, she accidentally knocked over her bag, and out fell a savings book. I bent down and picked it up. It had my name written right on it. At that time, having 10,000 yuan in savings was worth far more than it would be in later years. The savings book contained all of my layoff compensation, and the money I had painstakingly saved from collecting recyclables. And just like that, Lin Shengxiang had handed it over to an outsider, all while pretending to be a big shot. He had paid for his first love's daughter to stay in the most luxurious hospital room and receive imported specialty medicine. Her daughter, being an American citizen, wasn't even eligible for Chinese health insurance coverage. Sweat began to bead on Lin Shengxiang's forehead. He knew he was in the wrong. Nervously, he said, "Xiaolon, we're all family here. Let's talk this out calmly. No need to involve the police." "Family," I snapped. "You and your first love are the real family here." I fired back without hesitation. "And you dared to say my savings book was stolen by a thief. Turns out you're the thief." Lin Shengxiang's face alternated between pale and livid, especially when he heard me emphasize the words first love, asterisk. He instinctively touched his nose, clearly surprised that I already knew about their relationship. Just as he was about to say something to explain, my son interrupted indignantly. "Mom, so what if Dad took the savings book? Linlin is sick and needs the money. Can't we help them out?" While saying this, he even tried to snatch the savings book from my hand, being taller than me. If not for Bai Chuhi's fake attempts to stop him, my son might have pinned me to the ground. I slapped his hand away, but he still grumbled angrily. "Mom, why are you so heartless? Look at Aunt Bai, how elegant she is. You're just acting like a shrew." I nearly laughed in anger. So this is the fine son I raised? He looked down on me, aligned himself with his father, and groveled before Bai Chuhi like a loyal dog. "Mom, I am a shrew," I said with a sarcastic grin, pointing at the shameless Lin Shengxiang. "And you, Lin Shengxiang, aren't you supposed to be some big shot company boss? If you're so capable, why don't you and your son stop using the money I earn by collecting recyclables to fund your first love? Have you no shame? Who told you to collect recyclables?" My son retorted, his face flushed with anger as he shouted back, "Do you know how humiliating it is for me at school to have a mom who collects trash? I'd rather be Aunt Bai's son, a graduate of University B. You'd rather not even acknowledge me as your country bumpkin mom?" My son's anger got the better of him, his voice so loud the entire building could hear. In moments of rage, people tend to speak their true feelings. I stared at him in disbelief, then let my gaze sweep over the silent Lin Shengxiang and his gleeful first love Bai Chuhi, standing together, They looked just like a real family. Lin Shengxiang, always concerned about appearances, spent lavishly on fine dining and business dealings outside, squandering nearly all the money. If not for me collecting recyclables to make ends meet, our son Lin Ya wouldn't have even had 3 dishes and a soup to eat. And yet, at this point in my past life, Shengxiang's company was already nearing bankruptcy. Later, it was through collecting recyclables that we gradually grew to become the city's largest operation, which eventually led to starting our factory, transitioning into manufacturing, and earning our first significant fortune. But after a lifetime of hard work, no one was ever grateful. In the end, they just despised me for collecting trash, calling it shameful. Furious, I slapped my son across the face. Lin, yeah, your tuition and living expenses were earned through my labor. If you're so ashamed, then quit school. Your mother's family are farmers from the countryside. Your father's family are farmers too. And you're a farmer's descendant. You think reading a few books makes you superior? You've forgotten where you came from. I could feel my insides roiling, a metallic taste rising in my mouth, as though I were about to vomit blood, but I swallowed it back down, forcing myself to endure. Well, I don't want to be your mother anymore, I said coldly. Tomorrow, I'm divorcing your father. With a hoarse voice, I turned to Bai Chu He and said, if you enjoy being a mistress to someone picking up trash, then I'll grant you your wish. I want nothing to do with these 2 ungrateful men. With that, I clutched the savings book tightly in my hand and walked out without looking back. I hadn't even made it far from the hospital room when I vomited blood from my stomach. Ma'am, are you okay? A young girl riding the elevator with me was so startled that she quickly supported me and helped me to get a checkup. How ironic that my husband and biological son were less considerate than a complete stranger. In my past life, I scrimped and saved, avoiding the hospital because I feared the expense. Even when I felt discomfort in my stomach, I never told my family. As a result, neither my husband nor my son noticed I was suffering physically. In the end, it was my daughter-in-law who discovered bloody tissues in the trash and took me to the hospital for treatment. I had assumed it was my son who had arranged it and praised him for being filial. Turns out his filial piety was outsourced, and everything was done by my daughter-in-law. Thinking about it, I lifted my head and suddenly found the young girl before me somewhat familiar. Thank you, young lady, I said. What's your name? The girl handed me a cup of hot water and said crisply, Mum, my name is Su Yao. I just started working here today as a cleaner. That's it. The girl was wearing a loose school uniform, her hair dry and slightly curled, and her face thin and pale. Her facial features resembled those of my daughter-in-law from my previous life. Even her name was exactly the same. Suddenly, I remembered. The reason I had chosen this daughter-in-law in my past life was because of her kind and warm-hearted nature. Su Yao had lost her parents early and grew up all on her own. Unfortunately, she couldn't finish high school due to financial difficulties. Later, she went south to work, and at a young age, became a top-tier sales executive. Eventually, she rose to a senior position at a renowned manufacturing company. I recalled one particular business event. I couldn't find the meeting location. Others, seeing me as an elderly woman in simple clothing, ignored me with cold indifference. It was Su Yao who proactively helped me find the place. When she learned of my identity, she was genuinely surprised, saying she greatly admired my and Lin Shengxiang's entrepreneurial journey. She lamented that if she had known back then how hard I worked collecting recyclables to fund my dreams, she would have pushed herself to study while working. Thinking of this, I smiled warmly and held Su Yao's hand. You're a student at No. 1 high school, right? I heard you're doing very well academically, and he wants to help you with your studies, I said. I handed Su Yao a hefty sum of 200 yuan and tucked the cash into her pocket. We exchanged contact information, and I urged her to study hard. The young girl's eyes filled with tears, as she promised she wouldn't let me down. My gloomy mood suddenly lifted. Whoever is good to me, I will help them in return. Living a second life, I vowed to live by my own desires. The hospital results were also in. This time, I had caught my condition early. The stomach issue wasn't too severe, aside from malnutrition. All my bodily functions were in good condition. Much better than when I was bedridden in my later years. When I got home, I began packing my belongings. Since I decided to cut ties with my worthless husband and ungrateful son, I needed a clean break. Not long after, Lin Shengxiang came home, seeing me stuffing clothes into a woven sack. He frowned and grabbed my arm. "Xiaolon, what are you doing?" "The things our son said at the hospital were just angry words," he said. "You even slapped him in public. Now he knows he was wrong. I've sent him back to school." Even Chuhi told me specifically, saying it was her fault for causing us to fight as a couple. She apologized and asked me not to visit her anymore. "Are you satisfied now? So stop making trouble." His words were firm, but his tone was patronizing, and the sight of his indignant expression just made me want to laugh. Earlier, he'd been so desperate to save face in front of his first love, not wanting Bai Chuhi to find out he had no money. He hadn't even spoken up when our son tried to snatch my savings book. Now that Chuhi had played her retreat's advanced trick, he came storming back to me in frustration. I tossed our marriage certificate and household registration book onto the table in front of him. Looking at him coldly, I said, "Who's making trouble? Once we get divorced, you can go see your first love every day. Our son likes her too. So it's a win-win, isn't it? No need to wait until tomorrow. The Civil Affairs Bureau is still open. Let's finalize the divorce today." Lin Shengxiang, with his overly sensitive pride, froze on the spot. Being the chauvinistic man he was, the mention of divorce left Lin Shengxiang furious, his chest heaving with rage. "Chen Xiaolon, don't be so ungrateful," he snapped. "What divorced woman would anyone want?" I let out a cold laugh. "Bai Chuhi is divorced, isn't she? Yet here you are, rushing to play daddy to her daughter. You did the deed but don't have the guts to admit it. No wonder her family looked down on you back then. And to think you call yourself an intellectual. Such backward, feudal thinking." I returned every insult he had ever thrown at me, word for word. The fact that Bai Chuhi's family had once disdained him had always been a sore spot for him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so eager to remarry his first love. Even at the age of 80, after achieving success, my words hit his most vulnerable nerve. Enraged, he grabbed the household registration book and marched with me to the Civil Affairs Bureau to finalize the divorce. This era didn't have a mandatory cooling-off period for divorces like later times. The staff stamped the papers, and just like that, our marriage was over. Still fuming and knowing he was in the wrong, Lin Shengxiang decided to leave me his newly purchased car and only took the work unit housing for himself. I didn't have much at home to pack, just some clothes and my savings, and I left without a backward glance. That night, I drove south. Seizing the economic boom of the 1990s, I began a thriving business. Opportunities were everywhere, like untapped gold mines waiting to be discovered. The next time I saw Lin Shengxiang and my son was 3 months later. After the divorce, Shengxiang was left with little cash in hand. At first, Lin Shengxiang tried to maintain appearances, even selling the work unit housing to pay for Bai Chuhi's daughter to stay in the VIP hospital room. He claimed that the unpleasant incident with my savings book was just a mistake. In truth, he still had some money on hand. Bai Chuhi, thinking she'd landed a wealthy businessman, immediately sweet-talked him into his second marriage. She even demanded a grand wedding to be held in a church. Clenching his teeth, Shengxiang used the remaining money from the house sale to buy her an expensive wedding ring. After they married, Bai Chuhi didn't lift a finger around the house. Having never cooked before, Shengxiang even tried his hand at cooking for her. When he was busy with social engagements, Bai Chuyi would take the two kids out to eat Western food at restaurants. In less than 3 months, the money from the house sale was almost completely squandered. Shengxiang's company couldn't even pay salaries anymore, and his employees filed for labor arbitration as a group. Meanwhile, my son, who had been showing off by treating classmates to meals at school, was now eating plain noodles with cabbage in the cafeteria every day. I learned all this through a letter from Su Yao. After securing a major business deal in the South, I returned to attend Su Yao's parent-teacher meeting. The young girl had made remarkable progress in her mock college entrance exams. Each month, I sent her a stipend and reminded her not to skimp on food. Eat plenty of quality dairy and eggs, I told her. In the past, she would attend classes hungry, feeling faint and unable to concentrate. Her mind was always preoccupied with how to earn tuition money. But now, with proper nutrition, her health and focus had improved tremendously. With improved nutrition, her mind became sharper, and her grades improved significantly. Sing Su Yao. I couldn't help but think of my younger self. If my family had supported me in pursuing an education, perhaps my life would have turned out very differently. Just as I was praising Su Yao's academic progress, my son Lin Ya spotted me at the school. He froze dumbfounded. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Quickly, his expression shifted as he seemed to realize something. "Did you regret divorcing Dad? Are you trying to come back to take care of the two of us again?" I continued flipping through Su Yao's test papers, ignoring him completely. He then tried to sweet-talk me. "It's not like I'd say no, but the cafeteria food is awful. Mom, I want to eat meat." In the past, just hearing him say that would have melted my heart. I would have rushed home to cook him braised pork. But now, I took off my sunglasses, smiling faintly. "What's the matter? Didn't your American returned and buy take you out for Western food anymore?" My son's face turned ghostly pale. He stammered but couldn't come up with a response. Su Yao came over and clung to my arm, saying sharply, "Lin Ya, you're so shameless, I've heard everything. You used to despise Annie Chen for collecting recyclables to raise you, saying at school she wasn't even your mom. Now that your new mom isn't treating you well, you want Annie Chen to come back and play nanny for you?" Lin Ji's face flushed bright red with embarrassment. His grades had dropped in the recent mock college entrance exams, and he was on the verge of being kicked out of the advanced class. Meanwhile, Su Yao had excelled in several exams, and the school informed me she had been promoted to the prestigious Qingbai class. At the same parent-teacher meeting, Lin Shengxiang entered the classroom and froze when he saw me, noticing my presence. He awkwardly removed Bai Chuyi's hand from his arm and walked quickly over to me. He stammered, "V. Xiaolan, long time no see. You've become really beautiful. How have you been?" His clumsy lines were the exact same ones he had used when sweet-talking Bai Chuyi. I smiled faintly and replied, "Thank you. The parent-teacher meeting is about to start." Immediately, Shengxiang sent Bai Chuyi away, telling her to check on her daughter, who was at the bottom of her international class. Then, both father and son eagerly pulled out a chair and gestured for me to sit at Lin Ji's desk. But I remained seated next to Su Yao, not moving an inch. "I'm here for Su Yao's parent-teacher meeting," I said calmly. Their expressions froze. Lin Ya looked utterly incredulous. "Mom," he exclaimed, "I'm your biological son. Su Yao is just an orphan." Su Yao smirked at their desperation and said mockingly, "Mrs. Chen is now my godmother. She's here for me. You two pieces of trash have no right to claim her presence. Get away from me, you're polluting her with your stink." After the parent-teacher meeting ended, I planned to take Su Yao out for a celebratory meal at a nice restaurant. But as we approached my car, Lin Shengxiang blocked my path. Out of breath, he clung to the car door, his eyes filled with resentment and frustration. "Chen Xiaolan," he said bitterly, "are you being kept by someone?" I was baffled. "What?" Lin Shengxiang straightened his tie, letting out a disdainful sneer. Chu-hee told me all about it. The clothes you're wearing aren't cheap. And those sunglasses are authentic designer brands. How could you have earned so much money in just a few months? Mid-sentence, his eyes shifted to my driver. You even hired a young man as your chauffeur? I noticed the envious look in by Chu-hee's eyes from afar, and suddenly understood what was going on. A cold smile crept across my face. I waved my hand to summon the driver, instructing him to step out of the car. Then I delivered a heavy slap to Lin Shengxiang's face, and followed it up by flipping him over my shoulder onto the asphalt. Bai Chu-hee let out a piercing scream, and rushed over to check on him. Meanwhile, I coldly put on my sunglasses, crossed my arms, and said, I forgot to deal with you earlier when I slapped our son. Consider this your turn, old fool. I pulled out a business card from my wallet and tossed it onto Lin Shengxiang's face. For the hospital bills, go see my secretary. And one more thing. From now on, address me as President Chen, asterisk. Bai Chu-hee picked up the business card and gasped after reading it. Chuanjing Manufacturing. You're the owner of this company? I didn't bother replying to them. I got back into the car without hesitation, leaving them in a cloud of exhaust fumes. As I drove off in style, inside the car, I turned to Su Yao and asked, do you think I was too much of a shrew? Too unreasonable? Su Yao grinned and replied, that slap was perfect. With such a foul mouth, Lin Shengxiang dared to question your capability? I think one slap was too lenient. Beside me, Su Yao looked at me with admiration and declared that she wanted to become a strong, cool woman like me someday. I couldn't help but chuckle, shaking my head. Since becoming this tough old lady, I've realized that being unafraid of conflict and daring to fight back makes people take you more seriously. The more you avoid troubling others, the more you silently endure and sacrifice, the less respect you earn. Just like my former self, working tirelessly for my husband and son all my life, yet never measuring up to the white moonlight that was Bai Chu-hee. And now, Bai Chu-hee, having become Lin Shengxiang's official partner, had lost her allure, turning into nothing more than mosquito blood. My secretary told me more than once that Lin Shengxiang had been calling the number on my business card, claiming he didn't need me to cover his medical expenses, but wanted to discuss our son. He was trying to rebuild a connection with me. To think, the same man who used to grumble at speaking even one sentence to me after work was now eager to find excuses to chat. As the legal representative of a flourishing new enterprise, I was now far more valuable in his eyes than Bai Chu-hee. Naturally, he started sucking up to me again. I instructed my secretary to block his number and focused on growing my thriving business. But just a few months later, my secretary came to me trembling with fear, saying that Lin Shengxiang had contacted him using a new number. This time, he claimed her son was threatening to jump off a building because he was overwhelmed with pressure before the upcoming college entrance exams. The situation demanded immediate attention. I decided to return to accompany Su Yao through the most critical period of her life, and while there, inquire about my son Lin Ji's situation. It turned out Lin Ji's admiration for Bai Chu-hee's daughter, Lin, had been discovered by Lin Shengxiang. Unable to bear the oppressive atmosphere at home, Lin Ya had stolen the stash of money that Shengxiang had secretly hidden away, intending to elope with Lin. Furious, Shengxiang grabbed a stick, threatening to break his son's legs. Lin Ya shouted back, if it weren't for you insisting on marrying Bai Chu-hee, Lin and I would have already been together. He even accused Shengxiang of stealing my savings book to pay for Lin's medical bills, justifying his own theft as something he'd learned from his father. But Lin denied having any romantic involvement with Lin Ya, and the stolen money had mysteriously disappeared. Heartbroken, Lin Ya threatened to jump off the school building. The school staff quickly called the firefighters, who set up an air cushion below to ensure his safety. This incident occurred at the province's top high school, and the news of it reached even the Education Bureau's leaders. Finally, under mounting pressure, it was Bai Chu-hee who admitted the truth. The theft had been her idea, with Linlin goading Lin Yat to steal the money, which she had already spent to help her family. Her father had gotten into trouble after being reported for misconduct, and she had hoped to use the funds to smooth things over by cozying up to a rich man. But when it turned out that Lin Shengxiang was only pretending to be wealthy and was in reality completely broke, she had even needed to supplement their household expenses out of her own pocket. Upon hearing this, Lin Ya fainted on the spot. When Lin Ya fell to the ground from the building, he accidentally hit his leg, leaving one foot permanently disabled. But Lin Shengxiang couldn't care less about his son's condition. Upon hearing that his first love had only married him for his money, he flew into a rage and smashed a brick at the back of Bai Chuhi's head. Not one to back down, Bai Chuhi fought back, scratching his face with her nails. The two of them brawled right there on school grounds, and the police quickly restrained and took them into custody for reflection at the detention center. Su Yao recounted all of this gossip to me with great enthusiasm. I sighed and placed a piece of meat onto her plate. "Alright, that's enough," I said. "Hurry up and finish your meal. You still need to get to evening self-study later." Su Yao grinned and, with a bright smile, added a chicken drumstick to my bowl. "Mom," she said, "you should eat more too. You've been working hard." By now, Su Yao's household registration had been transferred under my name. I was officially her guardian. We exchanged a warm smile, enjoying a rare moment of tenderness. On Su Yao's college entrance exam day, I personally accompanied her to the examination hall. After finishing her last test, Su Yao ran to me, brimming with excitement, saying the papers were so easy. I hugged her back with equal joy. As I looked up, I spotted Lin Shengxiang and Lin Yan nearby. Shengxiang had an unkempt beard, dressed in ragged clothes. He was supporting his limping son, both father and son standing silently. When they saw me, their eyes lit up briefly, but they awkwardly rubbed their hands together, calling out to me from a distance, "Xiaolon, don't leave! President Chen, wait a moment. Is there something you need?" I replied calmly, patting Su Yao, who was baring her teeth in frustration, to soothe her. Then I turned my emotionless gaze toward Lin Shengxiang. My look seemed to pierce him, and he began stammering incoherently, "Xiaolon! No! President Chen, I've been dreaming about you these past few days, dreaming that we grew old together, living lovingly until our 70s or 80s. I interrupted impatiently. "And then I died of stomach cancer. And you turned around and married your first love." His bloodshot eyes filled with tears, and he covered his face, sobbing, "I regret it. I really regret it. They tortured me to death just to get my inheritance. Even our son ignored me after getting the money. In my past life, only you truly cared about me. I'll divorce Bai Chuhi right now. Can we start over?" With snot and tears running down his face, he looked at me pitifully. How absurd! Why would I give up my life as President Chen, just to go back and be his servant? I sneered coldly, rolling my eyes at him. "You're not worthy, Lin Shengxiang." Then I turned and elegantly walked away with Su Yao. From that moment on, I would likely never see them again. I had my own flourishing career, a bright, filial daughter, and I had even enrolled in adult education to further my qualifications. With a youthful mindset, I was living life more freely and happily than ever. In this life, I vowed to live for myself, completely on my own terms.